The fire came without warning. One moment, the village of Ashenvale was quiet, smoke rising lazily from chimneys, children chasing each other through cobblestone streets. The next, the sky split open with the thunder of leathery wings and the shriek of something ancient and wrong. Rogue wyverns. 6 of them. Not true dragons, something meaner, something without reason or restraint. Elias Rowan was 43 years old, a former soldier turned border warden, with more scar tissue than ambition and a knee that predicted rain better than any almanac. He had been delivering grain contracts to the village elder when the screaming started. He drew his short sword, laughably inadequate, and ran toward the fire. That was the thing about Elias. He always ran toward it. Most people didn't notice the small figure crouched behind an overturned cart at the edge of the market square. Most people were too busy fleeing. But Elias had spent 20 years in border service scanning for what didn't fit, and what didn't fit was a child, small, shivering, with iridescent scales barely visible beneath a heavy travel cloak, pressed flat against splintered wood while a wyvern's shadow fell directly over her. He didn't think. He moved. "Hey," he bellowed at the wyvern, waving his arms like a man who had entirely forgotten he valued his own life. "Over here, you ugly excuse for a lizard." The wyvern's head swung toward him. Yellow eyes, blank and predatory. It forgot about the child. It did not forget for long, only long enough for Elias to grab the girl, shove her into a drainage culvert, and slam the iron grate shut behind her. Then the wyvern's tail caught him like a hammer across the chest, and Elias Rowan left the ground at considerable speed. He hit the stone fountain at the center of the square. He did not get up. The darkness lasted a long time. Then, gradually, it didn't. Elias became aware of warmth first, not the brutal heat of fire, but something deep and resonant, like sunlight held inside stone. Then came sound, low, harmonic voices speaking in a language that felt older than mountains, syllables that seemed to mean things his ears couldn't quite catch but his bones somehow understood. He opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was carved from living rock, shot through with veins of molten gold that pulsed softly like a slow heartbeat. Enormous columns rose around him, each one engraved with scenes of battle and sky and figures with spread wings. Braziers the size of wagons burned with blue-white flame that cast no shadows. Elias tried to sit up. Every muscle in his body filed a formal complaint. He sat up anyway. "He moves." The voice came from his left, deep, resonant, carrying the particular weight of someone accustomed to being heard across vast distances. Elias turned. The being watching him was 12 feet tall, armored in scales of deep crimson that caught the light like hammered copper. Her wings were folded behind her like a cathedral's architecture. Her eyes were the color of molten amber, and they were currently examining Elias with an expression he recognized, the evaluating look of a senior officer sizing up an unexpected variable. Beside her stood others. 8 of them. Each one massive, each one robed or armored in the manner of their coloring, a silver-scaled elder whose beard had been braided with platinum wire, a younger green-scaled warrior who gripped a spear taller than a ship's mast, a black-scaled figure wrapped in silence and shadow who watched Elias with something that might have been curiosity, or might have been hunger, and who was difficult to read either way. These were not wyverns. These were dragons. True dragons. And the smallest figure in the room, standing barely to the crimson dragon's knee, dressed now in proper robes of deep blue rather than a travel cloak, scales shimmering between violet and silver, was Princess Lysara. She was staring at Elias with enormous golden eyes, and she looked like she had been crying recently and was deeply committed to pretending otherwise. "You are Elias Rowan," said the Crimson Dragon. "Not a question. Border Warden of Ashenvale's Eastern Reach. Former infantry soldier, 3rd Thornwall Regiment. Decorated twice. Discharged with honors after the knee injury sustained at the crossing of Vel Marin. You have been unconscious for 3 days." "Sounds about right," Elias said, because what else was there to say? A ripple went through the assembled dragons. He wasn't sure if it was offense or something approaching respect. "I am Driva, said the Crimson Dragon, first guardian of the Dragon Kingdom of Solreth. "These are my order." A gesture toward the assembled figures. "And you," she continued, with a tone that suggested she was still working out how she felt about this, "threw yourself between a rogue wyvern and my daughter." Elias looked at Lysara. The princess looked at the floor with extraordinary intensity. "She was scared," Elias said simply. The silence in the vast chamber stretched long enough that he began to wonder if he'd said something wrong. Then Lysara looked up. "I was not scared," she announced with the absolute conviction of someone who had been very scared. "I was conducting a tactical assessment of the situation." "Of course," Elias agreed, straight-faced. Another ripple moved through the Guardians. This one he identified, amusement. Reluctant, deeply suppressed, but present. Driva stepped forward. Her footsteps vibrated the floor. She lowered herself, not all the way, not a bow, but a deliberate inclination of a head that was the size of a warhorse, until her amber eyes were level with Elias's. "A human who runs toward danger when all others flee," she said. "A soldier who spent his last moment of consciousness ensuring a child was behind a locked gate rather than trying to escape himself. A man who, upon waking in a chamber of beings that could end him with a gesture, says only," and here her voice shifted, a perfect mimicry of his own cadence, "sounds about right." She was quiet for a moment. "The Order of Guardians has existed for 400 years, she said. "In that time, we have invited 7 mortals to stand among our number. Not as servants. Not as curiosities. As guardians, with all rights, honors, and responsibilities that title carries." Elias waited. "You would be the 8th. The green-scaled warrior made a sound. Possibly objection. The Silver Elder silenced it with a look. "You would train," Driva continued. "You would learn our tongue, our law, our history. You would serve the kingdom as we serve it, with your life, if necessary, as you have already demonstrated you are willing to do." A pause. "Your knee would be healed. Among other things." Elias looked around the chamber. At the dragons who watched him with varying degrees of skepticism, wariness, and something that might, in a few cases, be edging toward respect. At the carved columns with their ancient histories. At the blue-white flames that burned without casting shadows. He looked at Lysara, who was watching him with those enormous golden eyes and trying very hard not to look like she cared about his answer. "Can I ask something first?" he said. Driva gestured, "Proceed." "The 6 wyverns that hit Ashenvale. Were they stopped?" "5, said Driva. "My guardians arrived within the hour. The 6th fled north." "Then I'll say yes," Elias said, "once someone tells me someone's tracking the 6th. The silence this time was different. Then the black-scaled guardian, the quiet, unreadable one, said, for the first and only time in that meeting, "I am tracking it." And smiled, which was not entirely comforting, but was at least an answer. Elias Rowan became the 8th guardian of Solreth on a morning when the mountain peaks were burning gold with sunrise, and Lysara had insisted on standing directly beside him for the ceremony while pretending this was merely a matter of convenient positioning. The rites were spoken in the old tongue. His knee was healed by the Silver Elder's hands, which glowed warm as forged coals. He was given armor of black and bronze, human-scaled, which required some adjustment from the crafts dragons who hadn't made a set that small in a century. He was 43 years old. His ambitions had never been large. But here was what humanity had always understood, in its bones, across every war and winter and impossible circumstance it had ever survived. You don't have to be the biggest thing in the room to matter. You just have to be the one who doesn't run. When the ceremony ended and the other guardians moved to leave, Lysara fell into step beside him, still pretending it was coincidence, and said, very quietly, "Thank you. For the culvert." Elias nodded once. "Next time," she added, with enormous dignity, "I will not require a culvert." No, he agreed. I don't imagine you will. She was going to be extraordinary. He was already sure of it. And he intended to be there to see it.